Hello everyone, you're watching Variety Television and welcome back to another Pikmin video. Today, we're going to be tackling many aspects of Pikmin 4's final boss, the ancient Sirehound, and seeing what kind of theories that we can come up with. We're also going to be addressing Moss, Oatchi, and much more. This one is going to be like 3 theories in one, and so I want to try and do this one a little differently than I normally do. First, I'm just going to give you the theory as is, followed by evidence, and then I'll address questions at the end to help the video flow a little better. Now, let's get started. To establish some groundwork, let's talk about what we already know to be true. The Sirehound is a pretty large dog compared to Moss and Oatchi. Speaking of which, we know Moss and Oatchi both share the ancient Sirehound as a common ancestor, which lets us know that the name Ancient is more than just a name. We know that Oatchi arrived with the rescue corps, but the idea of Moss being born on the planet is reiterated multiple times, so we will assume that she actually was. We also know that Moss shares DNA with Pikmin thanks to Olimar's notes in the Piklopedia. And finally, we know that despite not being born on the planet, nor ever being put through an onion, Oatchi is able to develop a leaf tail. Some people have theorized that this transformation is due to oxygen, however, we only ever see one source of leafification, the onions. So, with the groundwork laid out, let's get on with the theory section of the video. Like I said before, I'll be addressing questions at the end, so hold out till the end if you have any questions or concerns, as I may very well answer them. While fighting the Sirehound, I started to notice something very interesting, something I'm sure all of you noticed, but it immediately made me start asking questions and got my theory brain in a storm. That is, the fact that the Sirehound seems to represent very specific elements: ice, electricity, fire, and even gloom. When I thought about this fact further, I also thought it was really interesting that the Sirehound changes color depending on what element it's using. I think we can safely assume that the color and element being used are clearly tied together. This wasn't the only thing that caught my attention about the Sirehound though. Olimar mentions that the Sirehound is very likely to be a common ancestor of Moss and Oatchi. In order for that to be the case, however, the Sirehound would have to be, well, ancient. At the very least, like a great-great-grandparent, but for reasons we'll discuss in a moment, I don't believe that's the case. The Sirehound was absolutely owned by somebody, and then abandoned or accidentally left behind. I think I figured out who was responsible as well. I think it has to be none other than Arl Shepard, the first captain of the SS Shepard. This becomes pretty undeniable once we start looking at some of the finer details. For starters, we know that wherever Arl came from, she and her team brought rescue pups with them. This fact is reiterated throughout the game as being true history. The Shepards have had the rescue pups with them for as long as recorded history. With Oatchi specifically being a descendant of the Sirehound, that would mean that the species of Sirehound would evolve to become rescue pups. However, Arl is the first of 999 captains. Nearly 1,000 generations have passed since the initial departure, and space travel isn't reinvented until the 65th generation, where the entry mentions finally flying out to space. In order for Oatchi to be a descendant of the Sirehound, however, the species would need to originate from the Sirehound's home planet, PNF 404. To me, this firmly establishes the idea that the Sirehound is indeed an ancient rescue pup, or a 40,000-year-old equivalent. So, approximately 40,000 years before the events of Pikmin 4, some sort of tragedy or conflict happened that forced the residents of PNF 404 to leave. I'll address the new look of the house and everything at the end, so hold those comments. We can assume that a tragedy or conflict took place because after the Shepards leave the planet, there is a new focus on rescuing people and rewriting history. To me, that sounds like something happened that they would rather forget, but it also had to have been bad enough for their new mission to be rescuing and helping people in danger. Whatever happened caused everybody to leave the planet suddenly. That's why things are scattered about as if recently used, and bags are packed as if people are getting ready for a trip. I'd imagine whatever it was caused a lot of people to leave everything behind. We know for a fact that one of the things that Arl and her group brought with them were rescue pups. My theory is that in a rush to leave the planet quickly, many animals and pets were left behind, the Sirehound being one of those pets due to it having a collar. I think that's the only way Oatchi could be a descendant of the Sirehound. There is one question that's actually very important to answer for this theory though. If the Sirehound was left behind by humans when they left the planet, then how has it survived for 40,000 years? Well, I think the Sirehound is not only the oldest form of a rescue pup that we see, but also the oldest form of a leafling creature that we see. Hear me out. The Sirehound exhibits many traits of a leafified creature, but even more so than the ones we've been exposed to thus far. Not only does the Sirehound take on the color of a Pikmin, but its elemental abilities as well. Whenever leafling captains get made by an onion, the leader is always covered in a layer of leaves that matches a Pikmin type. Red, yellow, blue, green, pink, white, and purple. We know this isn't directly tied to hair color either, because Olimar becomes a red leafling despite having brown hair. Each leafling creature is clearly representative of a type of Pikmin, and the Sirehound's fur is no exception. As for the matter of whether or not this could even happen, well, I do have some in-game entries that seem to give us an answer. For starters, Oatchi's own transformation into a leafling, despite never being put into an onion, lets us know that this process can apparently happen, at least to dogs, purely by exposure to an onion. In Olimar's entry for Moss, he theorizes that Pikmin are propagating their DNA in other creatures, a process that also happens to castaways by being put through an onion. He calls it a Pikminification of the body. The onions are clearly intentionally spreading Pikmin DNA to non-Pikmin creatures. And I think the fact that this is even possible proves the theory that Olimar proposes in his entry for winged Pikmin, that the onions are able to essentially take DNA from creatures that it's been exposed to itself and pass beneficial traits to its Pikmin, leading to the winged Pikmin that we know today. When a castaway is put into an onion, we see this very process play out. Onions clearly contain Pikmin DNA, and then proceed to pass that DNA on to castaways with the Pikminified bodies it's producing. Not only do onions function as nests, incubators, storage units, spaceships, and communicators, but apparently as a type of gene editor as well, intelligently influencing their own evolution. The Sirehound, being an older and more advanced leaf creature, can easily explain both its abilities and the fact that it has been alive for seemingly 40,000 years. We know from multiple characters that the act of becoming a leafling actually healed them, which makes a lot of sense if the process is supposed to secure permanent leaders. The theory is that once left behind, the Sirehound survived on its own for quite a while, all the way into old age, hence the gray and white in its fur. Around this time is when it was most likely exposed to its first onion, as I believe the only explanation for the Sirehound is exposure to multiple onions, or at the very least, long-term exposure to a master onion. Just like Oatchi, being near this onion allowed Pikmin DNA to propagate itself into the Sirehound. After years and years of exposure, the Sirehound has the DNA of multiple Pikmin types present in its body. At the very least, it has ice, yellow, red, and glow Pikmin DNA, seemingly able to choose what type it represents at a given time. Now, when I think of something that's meant to represent multiple Pikmin types, but also chooses which type is represented, I think of onions. Even master onions are able to detect which Pikmin are carrying nutrients and produce the corresponding type if it's able to. Onions also change color when taking on new Pikmin DNA. Even though it can contain the DNA of multiple Pikmin, it shows one solid color when taking on the traits of a new type. We actually see similar behavior with the Sirehound when it changes the color of its fur depending on the traits of Pikmin it's taking on. For example, when the Sirehound wants to use the electricity traits of a yellow Pikmin, it changes its fur to yellow, much like an onion does when it gains the ability to produce yellow Pikmin. The more I thought about this odd behavioral connection, it made me start to think that maybe, just maybe, the Sirehound's long-term exposure to the onions have resulted in the Sirehound being closer to the onions rather than the Pikmin. This not only explains the same symptoms of being a leafling, but also the Sirehound's abilities, and yes, even its lack of a leaf tail. Taking the Sirehound's tail into consideration as evidence yields some very interesting results. Rather than a thin, leafy tail, the Sirehound has a short, densely packed tail that's yellow in color, with tiny ends of hair sticking out. This is interesting because not only does this coloration not match the Sirehound's natural fur colors, it's also consistently yellow no matter what form the Sirehound takes. It is a major point of consistency for the beast, which leads me to think that this may be something that can't be changed. There's something else we know that's the same color yellow, never changes color despite its host changing color, and sprouts tiny hairs. The legs of the onions. It's as if the body of the beast represents the main onion containing the DNA of multiple Pikmin species able to change colors depending on which is utilized, while the tail represents the legs of the onions being very similar in description as we just discussed. And as for Moss's origins, well, I think Olimar was right in his entry about winged Pikmin, and I also think he was right about Moss being born on the planet. Unlike all the other dogs, Moss is the only one to directly share DNA with Pikmin, implying that rather than DNA being implemented like the other leaf creatures, Moss was born from something that's able to pass on Pikmin DNA. If we combine the ideas we've discussed so far, we can theorize that Moss was actually born from an onion, like a Pikmin. In summary, 40,000 years ago, something happened that caused the inhabitants of PNF 404 to leave in a hurry, forcing them to leave things behind. From packed up bags to games to pets, many things were left behind in the rush to escape. The Sirehound was one of these pets that was left behind, likely by Arl and her group due to its connection with Oatchi. As the Sirehound aged, it came in contact with an onion, beginning its transformation into a leafling creature. This process allowed the Sirehound to survive much longer than it normally would have been able to, and this increased lifespan gave the hound much more time to be exposed to different onions and Pikmin. Over time, the Sirehound compiled the DNA of multiple Pikmin, resulting in it having multiple abilities, as well as resulting in its appearance and behavior more representing an onion than an individual Pikmin. We know that onions can potentially take beneficial DNA from creatures and pass it on to the Pikmin it produces. The Sirehound's exposure to the onions not only allowed Pikmin DNA to get passed on to it, but it also allowed the onions exposed to the Sirehound to potentially take portions of its DNA. Moss was created by one of these onions using the Sirehound's DNA. This is why the Sirehound's natural fur color resembles Moss's, but older. And I think it's the only explanation for how Moss could have been born with a leaf tail and Pikmin DNA. Now for the questions portion of the video. The biggest question I'm sure all of you have is, if the Sirehound is a leafling creature, how is Oatchi's cure made from it? Doesn't Nell say that they needed a sample from a non-leafified dog? The answer is yes, she does say that, but I also think she's wrong. If we consider the steps taken to cure Oatchi, first, Yanni administers a cure made for people. The same cure he'd given every other leafling, and well, it doesn't work. Yanni says the cure is made from samples from non-leafified people, and Nell recommends trying Moss's cells. Neither of these cures work. But one cure is made for curing people, and one cure is made from Moss, who herself cannot be cured. She was born with Pikmin DNA after all, of course it wouldn't work. I don't think the problem is the leafified cells, I think the problem is the sample sources. People and a dog with Pikmin DNA. Interestingly, a cure from Oatchi's cells is never made or tried, so we don't actually know if leafified dog cells would work or not. Nell literally says, "My guess is that you need an unleafified dog." Her guess. My point being, while the cure could be used as counter-evidence, it's also very shaky since there isn't much actual testing revolved around the cure. We simply don't have all the information we would need. To add on to that, any of you thinking that the Sirehound couldn't be a leaf creature because we see it attack Pikmin, we only actually ever see it do that while it's under Louie's command. In Olimar's entry about it, he says it's normally gentle, so... The other question that you likely have is, if the inhabitants of PNF 404 left the planet 40,000 years ago, why is the house so nice, and why is this Game Boy still charged? That's not possible. While normally it would be impossible, PNF 404 is the one place that I'd say it is possible. Underground caves lead to above ground locations with sunlight and everything, and there's a difference between the way time passes underground and on the surface. Both time and geography are really unreliable on this planet. Also, it was stated one of the goals of this game was to make it feel more like Pikmin existed in our world, which wouldn't really work if everything was old and decrepit. So I think the answer of why everything is still intact is a mixture of design choice and the fact that time doesn't make sense on this planet anyways. Finally, the question of why did I propose that moss was made by an onion in the first place? This is the part of the theory that honestly I am most unsure of. While Moss does seem to be more closely related to the Sirehound than Oatchi, the fact that she was born with Pikmin DNA makes it difficult to explain her. She's also significantly smaller than the Sirehound, yet appears to be fully grown, so I just can't see Moss being a child or even grandchild of the Sirehound like I've seen some people suggest. Since we don't see any other native dogs, all I can do is make assumptions based on what we do know. The Sirehound has been on the planet for a long time, and Olimar believes onions act as messengers of beneficial DNA. I'll admit, it is shaky, but as of right now, I think it's the best explanation given what we have. So there you have it, the Sirehound Theory. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Let me know what you all think about it down below in the comments. If you watched through the whole thing, then chances are you did enjoy it, so please consider subscribing or leaving a like. Please keep in mind that this is all just a theory, and that's all I've got for this one. Stay tuned, Variety Television will be right back.